Hi, welcome to another episode of The Dumbest One in the Room, where I ask the dumb questions so you don't have to. So, we've discussed fiat money and the broken system we live with now. We've discussed what is blockchain and crypto. Now, the original, the king of crypto has always been Bitcoin. And today we've got Daniel from Hardblock Exchange, a Bitcoin only exchange based in Adelaide. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, how are you, Jason? Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about Bitcoin
Yeah, always,
with
mate.
you
And
today.
and Daniel's very active in the Bitcoin Australia scene, runs meetups, and does a lot of wonderful stuff. So I'm sure we're going to be able to pick your brain quite heavily. So obviously, let's go to the origins here. How and why did Bitcoin start?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you can really take it. It depends how far you want to take it back, but really, the Bitcoin was thought of in 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto, and I think the first block was mined around the start of 2010, on the year 2010. So that was when it kind of came into existence. It was called the Genesis block. But to be honest, even before that, you could argue that it started in the sense that people were working on this problem of trying to create digital money, especially in the 90s and in the noughties. People were working on that problem, and kind of there were the early iterations of digital money, which none of them kind of took off because it was a hard problem to solve. It was hard to create hard to create something. And it was really the big breakthrough came in 2010 when Satoshi managed to get something that did actually function, and it sold all these. There were a lot of pieces you had to put together, and Satoshi really put all these pieces that were people worked on previously to create the actual money that finally worked.
So it was basically learning on the steps taken before, making it better, and just making an improved version.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
basically. Yeah. So there were BitGold, there were some other, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there were many other iterations. And really Satoshi kind of put all these pieces together into one coin that actually worked. So there was, they're trying to get scarcity, trying to create like proof of work, all these things. Kind of previous projects kind of had them, and Satoshi put all these things like proof of work, blockchain, and scarcity together into one coin that kind of function.
All right. So basically, I go on to Hardblock or any other crypto exchange. I buy some Bitcoin. What have I actually bought? There is no physical Bitcoin. So what is it I've bought?
So see, and it depends, because when you're holding it on an exchange, it's a little bit different when you're holding it yourself, right? So normally that's why people often recommend to hold it yourself. You can holding it on an exchange, holding it on an exchange is okay at the start, but for large amounts, you want to hold it yourself because it depends on what you hold. When you're on an exchange, what you're actually holding is an IOU. The exchange really owns the Bitcoin, controls it, and you essentially kind of own paper Bitcoin. The exchange owes you Bitcoin. It's basically a database. But underlying that kind of, if you hold it yourself, or what the exchange actually holds on your behalf, is basically the private keys that allow you to control that Bitcoin. So basically what Bitcoin is, it's a shared ledger. It's a shared ledger that shows the state of Bitcoin belonging to different addresses. And to spend from those addresses, you need the private keys. So really what you own, when you own Bitcoin, you own the private keys that allow you to spend the actual Bitcoin on these addresses.
So
Does that make sense?
would it be
Yeah.
comparable to say it's like having a bank account? You've got your login, you log into internet banking with your password and everything, and that gives you the ability to spend or do whatever with your money.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, again, so it's different when on exchange or when you actually own the underlying Bitcoin, when you own the private keys. So on an exchange, you don't own the private keys, right? So at that point, it is just a password. It's a password to an exchange, and the exchange actually controls the Bitcoin on your behalf.
But even your own self-custody wallet, you need a password to open that up. The wallet's just your
Yeah,
own
essentially something like
custody.
a password. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You essentially need a password to unlock these bitcoins. Yeah.
So I've got my self custody wallet. I've all set that up. I've got some Bitcoin in there, and we have sort of touched on this in previous episodes, but let's ask it again. Is the Bitcoin actually in my wallet?
No, not really. So what you have is your wallet controls the private keys, and then basically it's a set of addresses, and the private keys to those addresses. So that's what it is. So it doesn't have Bitcoin per se. It just has a set of keys that allow you to spend the Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin actual balance of Bitcoin on different addresses. Again, that's a shared database, and everybody who runs a node, everybody has a copy of that database.
Yep.
So that's another thing that people talk about running nodes, because nodes basically, node refers to like a copy of a database. So if that database is distributed, everybody who runs a node has a copy of a database, and that database says this address has this many Bitcoin, this address has this many Bitcoin, this address has this many Bitcoin.
So basically, my wallet is just the method of interacting with the ledger, with the blockchain.
Yeah, but it's kind of interface. Yeah, when you look at it, you see a balance, but what it is underneath is a set of private keys that allow you, and your wallet kind of uses those private keys to spend the Bitcoin. So what you see is just a balance, and you can have the functionality of sending Bitcoin or receiving it, but underneath it is just private keys. And when you do a send, basically it uses the private keys to perform a signature, for it verifies that you signed it, that you're sending from one address to another.
Yeah, perfect. So say I sent you some Bitcoin. I've just sent you $100 of Bitcoin. What sort of happens in the background? Can you explain how the ledger works and the nodes work to basically send that Bitcoin from me to you?
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's kind of where we get into the mining. So people probably heard about Bitcoin mining. So, okay. So you send a transaction, you create a transaction, and everybody on the network sees that Bitcoin transaction and sees that it's signed. So all the nodes verify that it's signed properly with the correct signature, with the correct private key. So everybody can see that transaction, and it's just kind of floating about. But you want to put that in that shared ledger, that shared database. That's called the blockchain. That shared database is called the blockchain. So initially just floating about, and everybody can see it, but it's not in the blockchain. So that's where the actual mining comes in. The miners, what they do is every 10 minutes, they put a block on that blockchain, on that shared database. And when they put up, each block takes all these transactions that are kind of floating about on the network. It tags them, puts them in a block, and puts them on the blockchain. And that's called mining. So each time a miner puts a block, they get a reward of some Bitcoin as compensation, as a financial reward. And because it's actually hard for the miner, they have to put a block to make sure that it takes 10 minutes. They have to solve this difficult cryptographic problem, which takes around 10 minutes. And so they use basically computing power to solve that problem. When they solved it, they're allowed to put a new block with valid transaction on the blockchain.
So when they do refer to Bitcoin miners, it's not someone out there swinging a pick. It's literally computers solving complex algorithms.
Yeah, it is. And it's some now, that's right, it's computers. And initially when it started, going back to the early days, people were just doing it on their home computers, on the laptop, and people were, generating 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. But now it's huge, gigantic data centers, usually with thousands of computers with cooling systems, usually close to a cheap power source like hydroelectric dams or things like that, where they can get cheap power, and just huge, massive industrial computing operations to put that. And that's good because that gives it security. So that computing power is actually the security behind making Bitcoin impossible to forge. That gives it so you can't forge the Bitcoin, so nobody can steal the Bitcoin. So for the system to work, it needs that huge computing power. So sometimes people think it's like a wasted resource, but it's not. That's what provides the security for the network, that gives the network its integrity, and that's why we can trust it.
Yep. And you mentioned back in the early days, people were getting like 50 Bitcoin. Can they still do that
Mining.
for mining? Yeah.
Well, no. I think I can't remember what the block reward. So every 4 years the block reward halves. So I can't. I forget how much it is now. I think it's like 1.25 or something like that per block. I can't remember exactly now. But so yeah, it's much less Bitcoin. But of course, in financial value, it's much bigger, of course, because one Bitcoin is over 100,000 Australian dollars. It just went up this week, everywhere. So that's good.
Yeah. Not
So
parts
we're
of a
all in a
cent.
good mood.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not parts of a cent anymore. They're quite expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in actual kind of financial monetary value, it's actually much more because initially when people were mining 50 Bitcoin, it was worth actually nothing really. We were just giving this Bitcoin away. Nobody really cared much for it. So it was more Bitcoin, but the financial kind of value of this Bitcoin was much less than it is today.
So if I was to set up a computer and go, I want to mine some Bitcoin, is it worth me doing, or are those big data centers just going to take it all?
No way. It's not. No, it's not worth doing. Not certainly not on your. The answer is no. I mean, you can possibly sometimes if you have cheap energy, you can kind of set up a whole. You wouldn't do it on your computer, but you can buy what's called an ASIC and like a mining rig, and you can set it up at home, and then you can join up what's called a pool. And so a pool is like a bunch of small miners, home miners mining at home. And when they find a block, that reward is split between them. So you can do that. And some people do that. But even then, it's going to be hard for you to be competitive with the big mining operations who can usually obtain electricity cheaper than you and who have access to better system, who have access to cooling. And yeah, the answer is really no.
I can imagine.
Just go to Hardblock and buy it. Sorry for plugging my business, but yeah, just go to an exchange like Hardblock and buy it. I think that's much better.
Yeah, definitely. And look, most people that have Bitcoin and other crypto, they don't understand how it works. They just know how to buy it. So I think we've covered mining pretty well. But you mentioned the security and all those computers is what gives it its security and makes it safe to use. So how does it make it secure? Why is it considered secure? We've heard about quantum computing possibly being a risk to Bitcoin in the future, and how are we going to solve that?
Okay, yeah. So I guess those are like maybe two separate questions. How does the computing make it secure and the quantum? Maybe I'll talk about the quantum first because a lot of people, especially now, are talking about it, and so it's an interesting discussion. There's been active discussion about it in the Bitcoin space. So I think the summary of quantum computing, it is a risk to Bitcoin, but it is something that can be resolved. It's not like kind of a critical risk where Bitcoin breaks. So I think it is like a challenge that might have to be tackled in the future, but a lot of it in the media, it kind of gets a little bit overblown. Obviously we know how media works. So you need the headlines, and you need the dramatic kind of stories. Why it is like a risk, it is a little bit overblown. The first thing, often in the newspapers, we kind of exaggerate where quantum computing is. Like it's still very experimental, and maybe there will be breakthroughs, but but maybe there won't be breakthroughs for decades. It's kind of like fusion power. We don't know exactly how it will come, but it's a possibility, right? We can't discount it. But I guess best thing, a common misconception is people think if you have a quantum compute, you can suddenly like steal over Bitcoins. And that's not correct. First thing is most people, let's say we have a quantum computer, like a powerful quantum computer. What that can potentially allow is to break if you have the public key, it will allow you to kind of decode and find the private key and steal the Bitcoins, potentially. But it's actually more complicated than that, because the way actually Bitcoin works, again, it's kind of getting into the technicalities, but when you're sending to Bitcoin, you don't actually see the public key. We kind of simplify it, but how it works is you see an address, a Bitcoin address, and the Bitcoin address isn't actually the public key. It's derived from the public key. So usually when you're sending, when you give me a Bitcoin address, that's derived from the public key, but it is not the public key. And so normally I can actually see your public key. So basically, a lot of the public keys are not known. They're not visible. So if you have a quantum computer, you won't be able to break it because you can't decode the private key from the address, and often the public key is actually not visible to you. That's kind of the first thing that kind of many people don't understand. Now there are some kind of complications with that. The early, because Bitcoin kind of evolved throughout its time, and initially it used a different kind of signing scheme. So the actual initial coins, the early coins that haven't been moved to new types of addresses, voice public keys are visible because they use kind of an old sending format, but the new sending format, a lot of them, the public keys aren't visible. I don't want to get too much into the details, but basically what I'm trying to say is quantum computing, it's not a kind of a simple thing where it's going to break and you have everything. And you can make quantum resistant algorithms. So that's also possible. And we have, like I said, we have changed address formats. So we can actually upgrade to new address formats through soft forks. And that has been done. So there's kind of very ways to resolve that. And to be fair, there are downsides of these solutions, especially, for example, when we talk about the early coins, the Satoshi coins. So one of the problems is we can do an upgrade, but usually that upgrade would require people to move to their coins to a new address. But let's say Satoshi's coins, if Satoshi is gone, the early coins, nobody has the keys, so nobody can move them. So basically what could happen if some kind of quantum, there is a quantum attack, people who have access to the coins can move them to the new addresses, which are quantum resistant, but the actual original Satoshi's coins, which haven't been moved in 12 years, they'll actually be vulnerable. So that is a bit of a problem. And there's ways to mitigate that, but it's not easy. So basically, I guess to summarize it, it's not some kind of something that would break Bitcoin, but it is a challenge. It is a potential challenge if it comes. And we don't know when it's going to come about and if it's going to come about, but it could be a potential challenge. It would be problematic, but it won't be something that will necessarily just destroy Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, again, it's if it can be upgraded and things can be done to rectify any threats, and that's fantastic. Let's sort of go back to a bit of the original stuff we we're talking about. And you said there was 21 million Bitcoin. Is that hard?
Yeah.
Never, ever be any more? And why 21 million?
Yeah, essentially, basically, I mean, I think 21 million, I think that number was chosen arbitrarily by Satoshi. I don't know exactly why he chose that number. That's the number he chose. So it's 21 million. I mean, really the point is you want to limit the supply, right? You want to limit the supply. That's what makes it good money. Because if it was unlimited supply, it would be devalued and wouldn't hold value. So to make something, and that was the challenge in creating Bitcoin, to make something scarce, something that's digital but scarce at the same time. So that was actually the big challenge. By going back to the early discussion in the 90s and 90s, people were trying to solve that. How do you make something digital and scarce? So really it's 21 million arbitrarily chosen, and essentially to change that would be close to impossible. You could potentially change it, but really it would, again, going to those nodes, which I mentioned have like a copy of that blockchain. Everybody who has those nodes and that's distributed in the whole world would have to actually agree to the new rule set, and that's unlikely to happen. Basically, really, what it's called, something called a hard fork. So really, everybody on the network would have to agree, and really, what it is, we'd really be creating a new coin, and everybody would agree to abandon the old Bitcoin and move to the new Bitcoin. If everybody kind of agrees to that, then you can increase that number, but like you're not gonna. That's not gonna happen. Nobody's gonna agree in the whole world to like move to a new coin, so it's not gonna happen.
So apart from the scarcity, what is it that gives Bitcoin the value? Why do people think it's valuable? Is it the technology or just a belief that everyone goes along with?
Well, I think that kind of goes into the nature of money, and essentially Bitcoin is money, and it's a leap in the kind of technology of money, and really what money started off as back in thousands of years ago. people used to like have beads or like seashells, like rare seashells, and ancient tribes used to trade those seashells for goods among each other, and then moved into actual coinage, like bronze, silver coins, and then it moved into kind of paper money backed by gold, and kind of become electronic. And this is kind of a new evolution in money, kind of a qualitative leap in what money is. And people get confused because Bitcoin isn't used that much about for transactions, which is true, but that's only a part of what money is. Money is about using it transactionally, but it's also about storing value over time. And really, it has to, for something to be used as money, it has to have some kind of degree of scarcity, and it has to be trusted that it will continue to be scarce. Really, to really like, voice properties of money, making things scarce, making it trustworthy, reliable, making sure nobody can it can't be stolen easily, can't be forged easily, and it can be divided into little pieces, so you can send, whether it's a small amount of Bitcoin, $1 billion, or tiny cents, you can send it. And it's easy to transport, easy to hold. It keeps its value, and it's very secure. It has a lot of trust. Those kind of properties of money, coin, like that monetary properties, Bitcoin does better than anything else in the world right now.
Is
That's why
Bitcoin sort of practical for everyday payments, like me buying a coffee at the cafe and all that, if it takes 10 minutes for the transaction block to go through?
it's yes and no to that. In a way, it is. First, like, you don't need 10 minutes. So there's things like Lightning and other technologies. So it can be done instantly because Bitcoin, it's a layer you can build. It is programmable money, and you can build layers on top of it like Lightning. So you can make it instant for small payments. So that can be done. So technically, it is actually very easy, and it is practical from a kind of technical perspective. I think what really, so in a way, the answer is yes from a technical perspective, but it's not from a kind of regulatory accounting perspective. Essentially, you can set up like to accept Bitcoin, but that's pretty easy to do. But usually what really kind of gets in the way is, in most places, for example, in Australia, if you receive, as a business, if you receive Bitcoin, you then have to pay capital gains on that Bitcoin, and becomes like you have to track when somebody paid you, what price they paid you, and so it becomes a bit of an accounting nightmare, a little bit huge kind of overhead. Even more so in some places in Europe, you actually have to, there's a travel rule. So like you even have to, in some places in Europe, this is coming where the merchant would have to verify the sender. Again, this is because of regulations. So I think the kind of regulatory aspect makes it difficult, the accounting, but that's not really the underlying money. It's more kind of, the rules that governments and put on it.
So compared to all the other crypto, obviously back in the day, Bitcoin was the only one. There's been a lot of other coins come out and blockchains and all that. What's something that Bitcoin doesn't do as well as a lot of the others? Is there a downside to Bitcoin?
Okay, is the downside to Bitcoin? Yeah, I mean, the security you gain and the integrity you gain does come at centralized database. A centralized database will always be quicker and more efficient, right?
Yeah.
So basically, the whole thing is about Bitcoin. You're trading off simplicity in a way, in terms of like speed, but kind of decentralization and security.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you compare it to fiat money, you can make it can be very fast. But again, because with Bitcoin, with Lightning, you can make it fast, but that's kind of for smaller payments. But with a centralized database, the most centralized database, one thing for governments, it's much easier to control, right? So, if you see that as a downside, Bitcoin is harder to control. So
Yeah.
if you want,
But it's a playoff for the
if you
freedom
want,
and the security.
yeah. So like if you're like a government who wants to control everything, Bitcoin makes it a bit harder.
Yeah.
It's also, because it allows you that control, especially if you hold it in that secure, self-custodial way, you're in control of your money. But if you mess up, you lose your Bitcoin, right? So that's okay, in a centralized database, for example, let's say, again, we say like control, and usually like government control, it's bad, sort of, but it can be good sometimes, right? For example, if somebody steals your money, your bank account, and moves it to another bank account, that would you potentially be able to get it back because it's a centralized database, it's centrally controlled. So like a thief moves it from one electronic bank account to another electronic bank account, well, that can be reversed and you can retrieve it, you can get that back.
Yeah,
With
there's
Bitcoin,
no manager
it's
of
not,
Bitcoin you can ring up and
there's
get
no
them to help.
manager, exactly.
Yeah.
So unlike with fiat money, there is that manager. So so that is kind of a downside, yeah.
Yeah. So in closing, mate, what's one of the biggest misunderstandings that you keep hearing people have about Bitcoin?
Wow, biggest. Oh, I think there's there's, I think many. I think I would say one is, there's a few, but I think one is that people don't understand that Bitcoin is programmable, that you can build applications on top of it. So I think that's something people don't fully appreciate, understand. Yeah, I mean, I could give. You suggest one, right?
Yeah, just probably one of the big
Yeah,
ones. Yeah, I mean, there's always the one of
yeah.
people don't understand it's divisible. They think you have to buy a whole one, which we know that's
Oh,
not
exactly.
true.
Well, yeah, yeah. You think you have to buy a whole Bitcoin? Yeah, I mean, we think that the energy, the mining is like a waste that serves no purpose. Yeah, I mean, they think that it can't change, that it can't evolve. It's not easy to evolve for it, but we have introduced these things called hard forks and soft forks. So some things require hard fork, which makes it very hard to change, almost impossible. But a lot of things can be done by a soft fork. So, for example, to change the 21 million Bitcoin limit, that would be a hard fork. That would be very hard to change. But there's some things like a new address format can be done by a soft fork. So some things are very hard to change, but some things can kind of be changed. So there's possibility to change it.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much for that, Daniel. I really loved having you on again. It's been a long time since we chatted, and I'll have to try and get to one of your meetups again soon.
Yeah, no worries, Jason. Yeah, good to catch up with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Over the
everyone.
internet, and yeah, hopefully we can meet in person again.
No problem. Bye, everyone.
Okay, thank you.